The next speaker, like most of them, could go on and on and on for days. His knowledge of the space program, the space science industry, is one that exceeds one of anybody I know, and that includes some of the famous people that you might see on TV or some of the people that are quoted as being experts. David Adair is a true rocket scientist. If you ever want to meet a rocket scientist, you've never met one before, shake hands with him before you leave. He has experience as a consultant with all 5 space programs on this globe. Every country that has a space program uses his services in one form or another. This is his first time in Denver. He was with us in Tampa, but we're pleased and proud to present him here in Denver today. Doctor is wrong, I think, but David Adair. Give him a full head of steam because he'll go fast.
Thanks, Dean. How many people have ever heard of me before, seen any of my programs? Oh my gosh, there's a few of you. Okay, well, as you remember, the last time we had the workshop, it was a lesson in physics, how to get 2 things to occupy the same place at the same time. We had about 25 people we had about 50-some people in a room for 20, and it was like that. So we obviously became friends real quick in there. But I work with the space program on the commercial sector side. I do not work with NASA, and I've never worked with NASA. We have a little bit of problems in our philosophical differences, mainly because we try to make a thing called net profit, and they never heard of that. We in the commercial sector side are engaged in products where we create things on a space-based manufacturing. And a lot of these things that you have heard about, some of it's just starting to filter into your life, but a lot of it's came out from a long time. Let me give you an example of what I do. I'm referred to as a TTC, which is a technology transfer consultant. Well, that makes probably total clear sense to you, right? Well, let me give you an example of what that is and what I do. I take technology that's based in space research, where we design something we need to do in space, then I redesign it and I apply it into the commercial sector side. Let me give you an example of that. We might need to turn the lights down a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. In the 60s, we had astronauts out there, and like John Glenn here, and when they got out in orbit, the medical doctors on the ground would want to know how the astronauts are performing in space. So we built these sensors that we could hook onto the astronaut's body that was taped all up and down their body. There's one of the little sensors right there. And what we could get back was the blood pressure, the pulse rate, the respiratory functions, all the vital signs. Comes back to the ground through telemetry, which we would get the signals, and then the doctors would read the scopes, and we could get all the vital signs and tell how the astronauts are doing up there. Well, what a TTC would do, we'd come in, we look at that, and we go, boy, this would be great. We miniaturize it down into 2 suitcases. Now you've had a head-on collision and your wife or your family's out there, they're dying from the car wreck and the impact. The paramedics slide up next to them and jump out, and they got these little suitcases. They open up the suitcases. They hook the leads to the people. The information is fed to, by radio waves, telemetry to a hospital. The doctor then looks at the scopes and sees the vital signs, the blood pressure, the pulse rates, respiratory functions, to tell the paramedics what to do to stabilize these people to get them to a trauma center, and that is where that technology came from. That's called technology transfer. Now you might think that's pretty neat, but it don't really affect you unless you have a car wreck. Well, it's thousands of things that we do. Another example is, think about this. The astronauts in Apollo days was starting to eat solid food. And they're out there about 8 days, about 3 days out, 3 days back, a couple days on the moon. So about 8 to 9 days for a mission. Well, after about 3 days, something's got to give, y'all. Okay, there are no bathrooms on an Apollo capsule. It's no bigger than a walk-in closet, and you got 3 men in there. So you got a problem. And plus, everything floats. So we developed a material that could remove what they wore were diapers. And the material could absorb all nasty stuff and contain it and still keep you kind of dry so you could change and not have things floating around. We call Johnson & Johnson, you get Pampers. That's where the disposable diaper came from. So this is what we call technology transfer. We use it for more than just one application. Now, the implications of this seems pretty light or fluffy, you know, not really serious implications, but there's a lot of stuff that's coming that will be very serious for you to entertain. Another example is astronauts in the 60s used to eat toothpaste. Did you know that? That's all they had to eat. Imagine onion liver flavored toothpaste. Well, after about, and some of their missions like Jim and I would run 14 days, so imagine about 14 days eating toothpaste. So we had a riot, that's what we had. The astronauts said, my God, we got to have something better than this. So they said, we want hot food. We went, sure, we'll just heat up the food with you inside an oven. We'll just cook you with food. You know, how in the world are we going to heat up something? So started thinking about it, said, well, maybe if we can make sound wave generators and vibrate molecules, we can heat it that way. We call up Lytton, you get the microwave oven. All right? If it wasn't for the space program, about 2/3 of what's in your life right now would be gone. For instance, let's right off the bat, no pages, no fax, no cellular phones, no power books. Your digital electronics wouldn't be here. Your computers would not exist. Imagine trying to live without that. You think that will affect your life? If one of those things should shut down, you'd feel a major impact. We are beyond a point of no return. We cannot live without the computerization we have within our system today. Just one system would shut down. It's all interrelated. The UPS system shut down, and you're going to feel an impact from that. So all this stuff is a complex system that's all related. And this is some of the stuff we've done on one level. But the level in the commercial sector where we're at is a much higher level. And even in my own peer member group, we even have times where we struggle with it, even the concepts of the things. I'm really a newcomer to what is referred to as the metaphysical community. For instance, I've only been doing this for about 9 or 10 months, and I've done so many conferences. I've had to turn down a bunch. I just don't have time. I got research to do. But the first time I ever was introduced was up in Nashville, North Carolina. I was visiting a friend, setting up some camera lights. I wore a baseball cap and pulled it down and said, just tell him I'm a roadie, and I had an old raggedy-looking T-shirt on. And this group was an Eckankar group. And some person turned around and pointed right to me. I was sitting in the corner and asked me who my channel was. And I went, HBO, Cinemax? And they went, no, who's your guide? And I went, Tonto? So they said, you know, who are you? And I go, and then my friend that brought me there was holding his face like that. And I said, well, I'm a space technology transfer consultant. I build things in space, like superalloys, electronic crystals. And they're going, so much for the Eckankar meeting. I had to spend 3 hours talking to those people. So anyhow, it's been a kind of a two-way road here on learning. I've learned a lot of stuff. And my poor brain's about to OD at times. I thought metaphysics, you know, we read a few books and got it over with, right? Well, you people have some kind of system for knowledge gathering. I mean, it'd make the Library of Congress pale in comparison. So it's been a real rush here for me to absorb all this stuff. And I sometimes get headaches right here, and somebody said, oh, it's your third eye. I said, no, it's my brain about to bust, that's all. So I've learned a lot of terminology. Now, if you think this is funny, you're to see when I go back. See, I'm not retired, and I haven't dropped out, and I am mainstream 3D current right now in science, to make that clear. So when I go back to my colleagues and I mention some of these terms and stuff, they're going, Dave, what have you been drinking, bud? You know. So anyway, I said, well, consequently, this all has led me into some hot water. For instance, I met a man named Dr. Stephen Greer with a group called CSETI. Anybody ever heard of him? Well, next week I got to go to Laughlin to the International UFO Congress. So this is, I've never even seen a UFO, okay? So much less, I can't make the jumps that's, you know, that everybody's already there on certain planes, and I'm sitting there trying to, well, excuse me, I'm still a caveman with sticks and stones with liquid fuel rocket engine, you know, I'm trying to oh man, we got bases on the moon. We got a population census on Mars. And I'm going, okay, let's talk about that in a minute, you know? So I go back and pass it on to my colleagues, and they're going, you know, it is fun though, because the one thing that I get in a lot of arguments with my colleagues about is that when we're hit with all this stuff, they will just shut down immediately. And I'm going, you know, guys, do you remember what definition of scientist was? We were to explore the unknown, try to explain the unexplainable. How are we going to do that if you guys shut down and we won't even listen to it? So trying to enlighten my colleagues on that, but I get in hot water, and the example I was going to use was Dr. Gurr got me into Washington, D.C. on April 9th this year, and I had to testify to the Congress and Senate on UFO technology, of all things. So here I'm sitting in this big closed-door meeting room. It's a big ballroom in the Westin Hotel, and I recognize a lot of these faces because I've seen them before, either on television or in other committees throughout my years of working. And now I'm going to talk about reverse engineering. See, an incident happened 27 years ago in my life. I built a rocket, and some of you probably nod their head, they've heard of my rocket. This rocket was not a liquid fuel engine. It wasn't a solid propellant, which is only the two main engines that we use right now in space technology, as far as we use in launch vehicle capability. Actually, there's about 60 different rocket engines, but they only use these two primary ones. And it's the same problem that we have there that you experience with alternative energies and other such. These two ideas were sold really well. Now they're the icons, and we can't break away from them because of all the monetary strings attached to this type of technology. But we have other types of rocket engines, believe it or not, in the 3D world that's very similar to the stuff y'all talk about. Now, the engine I built was an electromagnetic fusion containment engine. Okay, wow, what was that? Imagine this, taking a piece of the sun and putting it in a magnetic bottle. That's what I did. Or better, a little bit more graphic demonstration, imagine detonating an H-bomb and containing it. And somebody goes, yeah, no problem, right? Well, I got, there's a little slight problem here in engineering, y'all. It's kind of hard to contain an H-bomb when it goes off. It takes more than a little bit of cardboard to hold that thing together. So the way I did that was I used a magnetic field, which is very similar to a black hole in nature. What is it that, there's only one thing we know in the universe right now, bear with me, on a 3D science level, that can swallow a sun. It's called a black hole. Right, so the sun goes down in there, and it goes through an opening at the very opening of the black hole. It's called a bent horizon. It goes right in there. The sun disappears. Obviously, that force can contain a detonation. So I replicated artificially a black hole. Now, what's interesting talking to an audience like y'all, you sit there and go, that's nice, and I just go, wow, you just take that. You make these kind of statements in the 3D science world, and I mean, it looks like a riot has set off in there. Geraldo with flying chairs, because you can't do that. That's impossible. No, well, we did it anyhow, and so that was the thing, because when I was 17 years old, I built this engine, and it flew, and also set the fastest record on Earth, and I won the most outstanding field of engineering sciences from the United States Air Force at the age of 17 when I did this. Now, the only reason I'm telling you this is not, oh, wonderful, great me, is to bring a point about is that I was slightly gifted at the time. I was working quantum physics in 1964 when I was about 10 years old in quantum mechanics. And that's long before you ever heard those terms. All right, when I was 15, when I was doing the calculations on the algorithms, on the mathematical equations of locking down these fields where we can get a sustained continuous loop, I ran into a problem. See, back in 1968 when I was doing this, y'all are spoiled and you probably don't even think of it that way. We had no laptops, no power books, no CDs, no floppy disks. All we had was, we didn't even have a calculator. All we had was this thing called a slide ruler. Paper and pencil and chalkboards, and that's it. Now, that might not impress you or worry you or anything, but you try to do this type of algorithms with those kind of devices. You're in a room this big with blackboards 360 degrees around, and you've got equations going in all directions. Because, see, we don't have computers that put it on CD and call it back up. No, you work on an equation over here, and you go down there and look across the room, and you write over here, and that is how we had to do this stuff. So the problem was, when I got to the end of this certain quantum mechanics theory on the theorem, I couldn't go any further because I just couldn't hold all the calculations. And anyhow, the point on this is that science teachers, my science teacher, could you imagine me as a science student in 1964 in a little school population of 550 kids, and I'm doing this kind of stuff? Science teachers looking at stuff, God, you know. So he took some, I didn't know he did this, he took some papers and copied them and put them back in my notebook. Then he went to his colleagues at Ohio State University. They were looking at it and they went, where'd you get this work? It's in handwriting. Where'd you get Stephen Hawking's work? And he goes, not Stephen Hawking, it's this 15-year-old kid out here in the cow fields in Ohio launching all these rockets. So, see, there's no faxes, no email, so they put a stamp on it and mail it, snail mail, right? It goes to Cambridge, England. Hawkins looks at it. 3 weeks later, Hawkins is at Ohio State University talking to me. So we worked together for a couple days on the algorithms on these type of mathematics, and we both still run into the same problem. We can't continue the loop on this. The reason I'm bringing this all up to you is for you can get a comprehension of what it's like to get where we were at that time. And we could have done much better, but we just didn't have the infrastructure to support us. So when this rocket was finally constructed, I had a federal grant, and I worked with congressmen, and we built this thing. And we went to White Sands, New Mexico, and that's where we did the launching. And then that's where I got in trouble once again. Because when the rocket took off, we landed it. They wanted it not back in the pad area or in New Mexico landing ground. They wanted 656 miles northwest there to come down right there. It would be soft impact parachutes. And I'm going, why are we going so far away? Well, they said, just program it and we'll drop it there, and we did. Well, 656 miles from where we were puts you about 125 miles north of Las Vegas into an area called Groom Lake. Okay? Now, if you don't know what Groom Lake is, I never heard those terms. It's either Area 51, right? We only called it Groom Lake. We never heard it. This is 1971, 27 years ago. And so I looked at my maps and went, fine, we'll go. You know, it's dropped there. So we get on a DC-9. Now I stop and go, you know, I know you guys are Air Force and you know all this stuff, but I'll just point out the obvious. See, under this wing, that's a big landing strut with the big wheels. We're going to a dry lake bed. That thing's going to moor up to its belly. You know, how are we going to land this DC-9 in a dry lake bed? Don't worry about it. So we get on board. So a couple hours later, we get there and look down. Yeah, they had a good reason not worrying about it. There's these twin 10,000-foot runways there, and it's this big Air Force base sitting there. And we land, and consequently, they took me downstairs to see something. And I'm kind of shortening this down for time, but when we get there downstairs, well, we go in this big hangar. Then we stop in this little golf cart. They have these neat little golf carts. You're going to see these things. These things can fly. So we was on this golf cart, and I'm sitting there looking in this big hangar going, this is neat. You know, nice empty hangar. So all of a sudden, the thing that all the doors come up out of the floors, and a little chains like the little guardrails. And they come up in front of all the big doors and little side doors and such. And lights are flashing. I thought, wow, that's pretty neat. And I thought, the only thing I've seen like that is a hangar deck on a carrier. And I thought, well, that means we're going to, sure enough, the whole floor drops out from under us. This big hangar floor drops. It's an elevator. So we go about 20 stories down, and we end up in this huge, cavernous facility underground, and we ride off in a golf cart, and we take a look at go down, and there's some really interesting looking advanced craft down there. This is 1971. There was a couple of what they call SR-71s, Blackbirds, sitting there. And there was an XB-70. Anybody remember that thing? There was two of them, and one of them crashed, and they had the other ones now in a museum in Wright-Patterson. It's huge to give you an idea how big the area is. The XB-70 would, one wing would fill this entire room. Okay, big craft sitting down. It's a big area. So about as far as you can see. So we're riding through there, and then there was a couple other craft there, which I'll tell you, I have no idea what even today they are. They look like teardrops. If you imagine what a teardrop looks like sitting there, and it's on wheels. And I'm going, that's some kind of craft. I've never seen anything like that. Yeah. So couldn't ask questions. We keep on riding. We get down to where we're going, and finally we go into this big room, and there's this thing laying on a table. And this thing is about the size of a school bus, and it's under big tarps. And they pull the tarps back, and I'm looking at it and going, it is an electromagnetic fusion containment engine. Now, mine's about the size of a football. This thing's about the size of a school bus. And I will humbly say, mine was like a Model A. This thing was a Ferrari. So, and it didn't take me long until I got about, they wanted to ask me how it works. And I thought that was odd. You know, if this is your engine, why do you want me to know how it works? They said, well, the people who were working on it, they had a little problem. They got called to other duties and all that stuff. And we just want to get your opinion on it. I'm sitting there going, this is interesting. I'm 17 years old, but I was born old, I guess. I'm about a 45-year-old inside. And he's got all these adult innuendos he thinks I don't understand. And I'm standing there, you lying? No, so he wants me to go look at this thing. So I walk over there and take a look at it. And by the time I get up within about a foot of it, the technology is far beyond anything at that time period in '71. Matter of fact, it's beyond anything 1997. So I thought, okay, I'm looking at this thing. And I started to turn around and ask, I said, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, we'd like for you to tell us how the detonation systems and containment systems there in the fields work. And I said, well, don't you guys that built this thing tell you? He said, well, they're not here right now. And I said, and he said, son, you help your country, don't you? Yes, sir, I want to help my country. So I turned around and started climbing. I said, I need to climb up on it. Like, I said, sure. And as I'm climbing up, I thought, you lying? So we get up on top of it, and so I started looking at this thing, and it is so advanced. The way the dual cyclotrons, where we use particle accelerators, this thing had an entirely different type of mass flow configuration, which actually I memorized. And it's going to be a really interesting thing to rebuild. But being born with photographic memory, that was real helpful. So another mistake they made. So the right in the center, what we call the eye of the hurricane imagine something shaped like a figure. What's a number 8 turned sideways? In mathematics, what's that called? Right. So right where the things cross is what we call the eye of the hurricane in this type of drive unit. And it was just a huge hole in this engine, about 4 feet in diameter, and everything's real smooth. Because, see, what happened was this thing had a core breach. A core breach is when this field that is holding this pulse explosion inside, it dropped. Now, when it drops, the temperatures of these engines run a little bit hot, y'all. It's 100 million degrees centigrade. All right, twice the temperature of the sun's corona. So when that field dropped, this engine's exposed to that temperature. It vaporized everything, and it's blowing out in a 360-degree pattern. But what was neat was this thing's fail-safe system worked like I hoped mine would, but I didn't fortunately have to find out. But this thing, as soon as that happens, this thing shuts its power down. So within a nanosecond, everything shuts down. But still, that blast wave took out that much of the engine, which I'll get into more about this engine later. But I got a little bit more encountering with this. The engine is a symbiotic engine. Okay, that didn't hit you, okay? Let me explain to you what that means. The engine it's an entity of its own. Well, let me tell you, the thing the Air Force is having trouble with is control systems. On my engine, I had miles of wiring and circuitry. If you ever seen the old Fat Boy or atomic bomb, a soccer ball at one time would have been top secret in the Manhattan Project. You ever look at a soccer ball? That would have been top secret. That's how you detonate a cyclotron. At each of the corners of the pentagons, you have a wire for each explosive, and they all explode at one time, blowing simultaneously and precisely to split the atoms. So a soccer ball, if you had a soccer ball in Manhattan Project, they would have buried you for a long time. So anyhow, this thing had no wiring. And I thought that was interesting. And then I started figuring out why it doesn't have wiring. It has all this tubing that goes all over, its cascades around it, but the tubing looked familiar. It's the same pattern of a brainstem with all the cascading feelers. And there's a fluid inside these tubes. And I just realized what was going on. See, when a pilot slides down into the craft, they merge with the craft. His brain becomes physically fused with the spacecraft by, I don't know, you put a helmet or slide in a seat, I don't know what form they were doing. But the result is that the thought patterns of the pilot become the firing circuitry system of the engines. All right. Now, that's called symbiotic relationship. The pilot and the craft and the engine are one. All right. And aerodynamics and engineering today, that's one of our wet dreams, okay? If we could do that. Now, you're sitting there going, now, with this audience, I don't have to do this, but if I was talking to a group of scientists, believe me, they would be just chewing the bark off the trees back there, you know. No, it's all BS, can't be doing that. Well, let me bring you up to current events. At Princeton University right now, there is a lab there with a guy named Dr. Bob John. And Dr. John is funded by McDonnell Douglas. You ever heard of them? Okay, not a little slop outfit. And guess what they're doing? They're building a symbiotic firing order system for the F-22 attack fighter. Now, what does all that mean? It means, now imagine this. Anybody ever see the movie with Clint Eastwood called Firefox? Okay. The way that plane worked, if you wanted to fire a missile or rocket, you think it, and the aircraft will pick up your thought and fire a rocket or fire the cannon, whatever it is you're thinking to fire. The reason that's important, at 1,600 miles an hour in a dogfight, y'all, you don't have much time to sit here, The time it takes you to do that, you're dead, because the other craft will lock on you and fire and you're dead, all right? So a pilot doesn't even have time to think. That's why we now have heads-up viewing. You don't even have time to look at your dash anymore. You have to look straight through the canopy, and projected on a clear plate of glass is a type of holograph system where you can get all your instrumentation and still look straight out the window, so you can see all this at one time. That's the way they function today. But that's not fast enough. Now we got to get the engines to merge together with the pilot. But Dr. John is doing the opposite. He's trying to shield the pilot from the firing system. Now, why would we do that? The pilot goes home that night before, catches his wife in bed with basketball player, team, horses, whatever. He's having a bad day, okay? Next morning, he straps in his fighter. He now is going to go protect us with incoming fighters. He's having a bad experience from last night, right? He's not completely with it. The plane will sense that and hesitate on what to do, and he's locked on and he's dead. We have to shield this. But isn't this interesting? This is all in the symbiotic relationship. This is hard 3D science. We're doing this right now. So the question I asked was, which was the thing that made everybody uncomfortable, where did you boys get this idea? Back to the symbiotic engine. When I saw the patterns and how it's working, I just turned around. Being from the South, we have certain ways we say things. For instance, you all is singular, all y'all is plural, okay? So I turned around and said to the Air Force guys there, I went, hey boys, I'm standing on top of this thing, I'm looking down at them, you know what, this thing ain't from around here, is it? You know? That started getting them upset. And I said, well, let's make some assumptions. This is an engine, right? You know, can you say spacecraft? You know, and you took this thing out of a spacecraft. Where's the spacecraft? Let's assume there's occupants. God knows what you do with those guys, you know? So I said, you boys want to tell me where this thing come from? And they came after me, pulled me off that thing. So things went bad, and that's a long story. But life hadn't been the same since, hardly. But anyhow, I had explained all this to senators and congressmen. Now try doing that. Just remember, like Von Braun told me when I was a kid, I knew him when I was 12. He said, David, when you talk to the senators and congressmen, just remember, talk to sixth graders and you'll be just fine. So that's why you bring little models and toys. I tell you, old Werner had a good batting record. He had a 100% batting record on asking for funding. Never was turned down. And the reason why, he wouldn't use terms this big. He'd get down and show them how things work. You know, and you give them models, you know, all these big, neat models, and you get on the floor with them. He said, that's the other thing, don't get right down the floor with you. You start playing with them, you know. And if you ever look in the history books, you'll see von Braun on the floor with senators, you know, playing with these rockets and stuff. And and you leave the rockets with them. You know, they got something to take home and play with, you know. I mean, come on, you cannot talk advanced propulsion systems to a senator from Iowa, right? He's going to sit there and go, you know, well, we need this for the theoretical horsepower so we can get the conversions on the engine so we can get this to the specific impulse. You know, that senator, As soon as you leave, he's going, hell, I ain't voting for that thing. I don't know what it is, you know. So you get turned down. That's why NASA has forgotten that, and that's why they're having, plus they've forgotten about a gazillion other things. Basically, matter of fact, the space program that von Braun had and the one you have today are two different entities. They're not the same. And I'll explain that to you in a workshop. When we stopped flying in 1981, well, back up, 6 years before that, well, in 1975, do you remember from 1975 or 76 to 1981, we never flew an American in space. Check that out. Nobody ever flew. What happened was a transition period. And you know there's no Saturn V's left? We can't even build them. The machines that built them were cut up and sold for scrap iron, and all of the blueprints and drawings were dumped in a dumpster. The Saturn V does not exist anymore. They're just a big hull sitting out there on display because they destroyed the entire Apollo program. My question, why did they do that? That's some of the questions I'm asking now in my arena, which is causing real uncomfortable problems for them. They think it's uncomfortable now. Wait till I hit them with some other stuff in the next testimony. But I don't know why the agenda is that way. So anyhow, the space program shut down, and when it came back up, there's a different entity working there, y'all, and you're not invited. So I'm constantly at war with this group, and we're trying to figure out why things are running the way they are. I've told everybody that's heard me before this, and some of you may know, but let me give you another little current event here. Do you know where the controls are for the Hubble telescope? Show you how things are running in this system. Oh, they're at Houston, or they're at the Cape, or Washington, right? Johns Hopkins Medical Center. That's fact. Now, what is the controls of a space-based telescope doing in the middle of Johns Hopkins Medical Center? Well, see, NASA wants to privatize. Now, you got to watch these words. They want to privatize. That's not commercialized. We want commercialized space. Privatize means that they can get private contractors in, like running the controls on the Hubble telescope, which means that contractor does not have to show you what he sees until 6 months later. Now, why are they doing that? You know, in the old days in JPL, when we land on Mars, you get to see it real time. Now, I've been raising a ruckus about that for the last 2 years, and now when we're on Mars, suddenly you get to see things live at JPL. Or at least there is a delayed transmission, but at least it's not 6 months. So you got to watch how they're doing this stuff, because it's going to affect you. Now, the problem I have here with the metaphysical community, y'all are so far into other areas of assumptions and conspiracies and such, it really is difficult for me to try to transition with you, because I have to stay grounded in this 3D world. But I listen to what you're saying. I have to admit, sometimes your theories fit the circumstances when no other answer will fit. That worries me, y'all. You're messing with my brain here. I'm telling you, you really worry me, because I'll be sitting out by myself and I see something happen in the politics, and I'm going, well, that's just what all those people back here in Denver was talking about. You know, what's wrong with this picture? You know, I've got metaphysical answers that fit the problems, and there's no other thing that will fit the circumstances we're in. So maybe there is something to all this stuff. But I know that when I start asking some of these questions of my colleagues, boy, you talk about somebody clamming up. Man, that's worse than loaning money. You never see them anymore. So they forget all about you. So anyhow, come all the way back around to where I had to testify at CSETI. This is where things get interesting. because no sooner I get through testifying, there are 13 of us, 12 or 13 of us. The other people had seen, locked on radar, chased these blips. They've seen definite confirmation on visuals. The attack pursuit aircraft had locked onto them. They chased them, and that was what they were telling them. And in the 3D world, we find that exciting, y'all. Okay, that's really exciting to us. Visual contact, radar contact, lock on. Okay, and now that may be mundane and boring to you. Oh, we have them stopping over here and asking for directions and help folding our road maps for them and stuff, Well, I'm still back here in the 3D world, so, we get excited over radar blips, all right? But I'm the only one right to that particular moment I had hardware contact. So that worried me a little bit. So anyhow, I was allowed to talk to Congress and the Senate, but I wasn't allowed to talk to the press the next day. I got sequestered. And Dr. Greer did that, and I thought that was kind of strange. So I went home, and I wasn't allowed to talk to the press. So naturally, everybody's conclusion would jump to cover up, right? He's wanting to hide all this. Well, I just let it go, but then I kept this word of this incident got out in the UFO community, and boy, it set people really hostile in a hurry. And so finally, I couldn't get Dr. Greer to return my calls, and I wrote him a letter and still got no answer. So I was starting to get just starting to drift into paranoia myself. Hey, this guy's manipulating everything. So when I was in San Diego doing a whole life conference, I started spouting this out, and one of his best friends was in the crowd. He got upset. He said, he's not doing that for a reason. I said, well, have him call me, okay, directly, soon. So by the time I got home, Dr. Greer calls me, and he had been out of the country. This guy travels a lot. So that's why I didn't get to talk to him and ask him, why did I get sequestered and you didn't want... So he never gave me an answer. Well, now he gave me an answer. And after he gave me the answer, it made total logical sense. It's the way he's doing a strategy to try to get this information dumped to the Congress and Senate. And I happen to agree with him. It makes sense. The point to this is that I could have went into a lot of backbiting. I could have went into a lot of slamming Dr. Greer stuff. Instead, I stayed calm, called him directly. We talked face to face. We had to work out a problem because he didn't want me to say anything. I said, I can't do that. I've got to tell people something. So we worked out a compromise, okay? And now we're moving along, and we're back on track, and everything's fine. We got over our problem. We worked it out. We came to a compromise. We solved this with a solution. There is way too much backbiting and backstabbing in your metaphysical community. And it's not just your community. I have it in mine. We're the originators of it in the scientific world. The thing I'm trying to get across to you, you've got to stop this. You have to stop this backbiting and infighting with each other. This is what I'm going to talk about when I get to Laughlin with the UFO community. It is horrendous what's going on in there. And I'm going as a strictly observer. I'm not a UFO researcher or anything, but why is researchers attacking each other? Simply because their data doesn't match? And if you want to make if you want to punch a hole in that federal wall, and you're like a light, right now you're like a flashlight beam. You're scattered because of the differences in infighting and structuring and all that. You're going to have to talk to each other, compromise, and come to a conclusion, and then bond. And when you do, you become a laser, and you'll burn a hole right through that wall. So, also, let's address a couple other issues here. And this is so strange that I'm having to bring this type of stuff up. I'm a rocket scientist, for God's sake. For instance, there was a lot of mistakes. I was at Roswell. They had me out there to do the talks and everything. And there is a lot of hostility toward the government. Like, this is new to y'all? Has anybody ever heard the word forgive? You ever thought about it? The leaders at that time really had grounded reasons for not wanting that information out. We had just come out of a most horrendous war of all time on the planet. You had, just in the Soviet Union alone, you had 22 million dead. All right, it wasn't a little picnic for the planet. So everybody's paranoid and real jumpy right now, and so now what are you going to do? We just went through a world war, now we're going to go to intergalactic war. That's the main thing that the public would have jumped to at that moment in 1945. And then in 1947, when there was a crash with something. So the thing was, they made a decision. It might not have been the best one, but they had to make one. Then it started perpetuating lie process. And something did crash out there, y'all. Believe me. So the thing is, if we go down the path of vengeance, we're just going to undo ourselves in the process. Because that is not the path you're supposed to be going. My God, this sounds metaphysical, David. You know? You ever thought about maybe forgive these people, let's do a disclosure, and not, I don't know if I'd want to tell the truth when they're going to tack me to a tree out there and use me for, a hide board to be dried out in the sun. I'll be reluctant to tell the truth too. Whereas if you can tell the truth and you get over the stuff, we forgive and we move on with this, we can move on as a society, as a structure. Now, maybe I know a little bit something about that. Now imagine when you're 7 years old and you're already working stuff called quantum physics. It doesn't even exist yet. Then you manifested it in 3D reality in a rocket engine. So you're 12 years old and you launch your very first rocket in your life. It leaves the backyard at 3,500 miles an hour. Burns a hole about the size of this area in this room. My friends are with me and most of them aren't even allowed to play with matches, and I just incinerated a football field. This thing is streaking. I mean, it is huffing and puffing. It moves to 100,000 feet altitude. That's because I built a homemade altimeter and I could track it, okay? So I turn around to my friends and it's just like Bugs Bunny. There's just dust where they were. My mother hears the noise, along with about 1,000 other people in about 5-mile radius. She steps out and she goes, see that thing just a cooking up through there. She looks at me. There's half the yard burnt to a crisp. And the first thing, she didn't say anything about that. The first thing she asked, where's your friends? I said, somewhere in the next county by now. So I asked her, I said, Mom, how come I'm not like my buddies? I just don't do other things like everybody else. Then my mother told me something I remembered ever since. She told me, David, you didn't come from me, you came through me. So, and I'm sitting there going, 12-year-old, and I'm trying to go, what does that mean, She said, you'll figure it out. She was right. Now, I was born in West Virginia, in Welch, West Virginia, and there was no power where I was born, electric power. I mean, I was born in number 10 Pocahontas coal fields. I'm proud to be a coal miner's son. So anyway, so I came from a long line of coal miners. And my dad was gifted in mechanics, and I picked that up. And that's another story in itself. He eventually moved away when I was born in West Virginia. He worked for a guy named Lee Petty, who has a son named Richard. I don't know if you ever heard of these people. But where I come from, Richard's called King Richard, and that's not meant frivolously. They're race car drivers, the most famous race car drivers of all time. My dad was their pit mechanic and crew chief for about 20 years. So when I was 12 years old, there was a state-of-the-art machine shop big as this room. And that's how I had all the facilities to build such rockets. Also, they threw me in the backpack air and I could overhaul a 426 Chrysler Hemi in 3 hours. Now, guys know what that is. I see some guys, whoa, God. See, these Chrysler Hemis, they had 2 4-barrels at 625 horsepower, and that's a lot of horsepower, y'all. And I could overhaul this thing when I was 12 years old, and they had kept me in the back because child labor laws, Hey, don't tell them about your kids building back here. But 3 of my engines won 5 Grand Nationals, so that's pretty neat. But anyhow, that was one of the answers somebody asked me, how did you have the tooling facility? State-of-the-art machine shop. What is that machine shop designed for? Speed. Boy, did I take it to a new speed. So anyhow, I grew up in that area, and it was humble. I came in on a humble thing. That's the whole point of this. My mother said I came through her, and I was trying to think about that. The thing was, I was gifted. I was working quantum physics at these times. I built these rockets at these ages, set these records, won awards after awards after awards. And that wasn't, I always knew that wasn't me. I'm a hillbilly, for God's sake, you know? It's my gifts that's doing all that. It's my talents. It's what I've been given. And so my colleagues, what brought all this up was, what are you doing on this metaphysical talking circuit? You know, we got a gazillion things in your labs you could be doing. You take time out to do all that. And I said, it's what I was given. All the stuff I was given was not to stay in the laboratory and make money. It was to give it to everybody. That's what these talents were given for, you know? So 9 months ago, I made a decision that I'll use the metaphysical community as a platform to let you get introduced to the kind of world that I build. That's actually, I'm building for you anyhow. We really don't have a lot of time yet, but one of the things I was talking about, which I'll show you in the workshop, it just takes too much to go in detail, but I'll give you a quick capsule. Imagine this. How in the world can you possibly shape molten metal in a weightless environment? You ever thought about that? You can't pour it in anything. There's no gravity. You can't inject it because you can't freeform cast it into a shape. So all of a sudden, you got this 2,000-degree glowworm floating with you. You're looking at that thing, you know, and you tell a fellow astronaut, boy, don't let that get in your underwear. You're not going to like this. So how do you shape it? It's like hammering Jell-O to the wall or shoveling smoke. It's a little difficult. So the way I came up with an idea for this is when I was 12 years old, my oldest brother took me to Woodstock. Yeah, the Woodstock. My parents beat him half to death when we got back, though. But I miss my oldest brother, I really do. So anyway, no, they didn't kill him. But anyway, I was there, and I was only like from here to the VCR camera from the front stage. Led Zeppelin was playing a song called Whole Lot of Love. I don't know if you ever heard that thing. So speakers were big as this wall, right? It is so loud, I'm going, my God. So I get these peanuts and get them out of their shells, clean them off, and stick them in my ear so I don't get hearing damage. All the little particles are laying there, and they start doing these shapes. And every time they refrain, play the same thing, they come back to the same shape. So I started telling my colleagues, they're looking at me like, what's wrong with you? I said, I'm going to explain something to you. Follow this. For every corresponding shape in the geometric universe, there's a corresponding sound. So with the aid of, you know, you say, this crowd just goes, yeah, naturally. Well, let me bring you back to my world. This is wow, you know. Gee. So we're sitting there, and so with the help of a Cray 3 computer at 6 billion calculations a second, I find the correlation programs. What is music? CD. What's D? Digital. Music is nothing but a series of mathematical equations. All right? So what happened was, by composing songs with a 6-dimensional field of sound speakers in a weightless environment, I started doing 3-dimensional casting of metal with stereo sound waves. So, thank you. Now, because we thought that was pretty neat, you know. The next thing that happened, though, it got even better because it's what happened to the internal structure of the metal. I can do something there that I can't possibly do here on Earth. And I'll go in that later. We'd have to do the workshop. I hate to leave you hanging, cliffhanger. You know, this guy's mean. No, it's just that if I don't give you all the details we go up to, it won't really make sense to you. It just sounds like a bogus statement. And in my world, you can't say, I breathe air without proving it, you know. So it's hard when we validate things. So we have to validate everything we utter. So anyhow, utter. Well, that reminds me. So people are laughing all right. I have cow jokes. And if I think you're drifting, I'll hit you with a cow joke. I'll do it anyhow. By the way, the person who told me these cow jokes is another fellow West Virginia. His name is Chuck Yeager. You ever heard of him? Yeah, old Chuck, man, every time Chuck tells you a joke, he elbows you. Honest to God. Cornball to the max. Oh, I prove that I can. Well, here's one of his jokes. If you know the joke, don't answer it. It's because some of you have heard this before. What do you call a cow that's had all 4 legs cut off? Ground beef. Now, this may sound nasty, but it's not. It's not impolite. What do you call a cow that's had an abortion? Well, that cow's been decaffeinated. That's Chuck Yeager for you, buddy. I like Chuck. He's such a nut. Anyway, the stuff that we will talk about in the workshop is all the projects, the supermetals, electronic crystals, the type of medical research we're doing out there. And it is just really a fantastic world. And that's what I was gifted to do. I can show you all this stuff. I can show you what's coming. It's not gloom and doom, y'all. Don't buy into the paranoia that's just everywhere around you. Because if it was, don't do that. This is the greatest time to be alive. It is fantastic. It's fun. There's so much to do. I tell this to kids in high schools when I do all the high school lectures. It is great. They really believe there's no future. I'm going, are you kidding? That's the best future you ever had in your life. You just don't know anything about it right now. So I'll show all the different structures and things, the jobs that's coming. The jobs that are going to really create a nice lifestyle for everybody don't even exist yet, but they will very shortly because of the type of paradigm shifts we're doing in our technology. And the space arena is really loaded with it. For some reason, I have to extract it out of the NASA's grip, but we're going to turn it loose anyhow because they can't control it all and they really got too much to do with all the other things. That's what we're doing in the aerospace commercial arena. And that's why you probably hadn't heard a whole lot about us. So that's the type of stuff we'll be doing and in the workshops and all the different things we'll be up to. Plus, I'll answer more personal questions than anything. Also, there is one commercial plug. If you want to see the engine that I built, next week at the theaters, there's a new movie coming out. It's about my engine. It's called Event Horizon. So you can catch that at a local theater and take a good look at the engine that's performing because the black hole that they are using, the engine and the spacecraft itself are the black hole. Because see the containment field that I held that explosion with? What happens if you extend the field outside the craft? I hadn't had time to do that yet. Time's up, y'all. Thanks for having me here.
David.